Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Alertus Seminar Series. Thank you for being a part of our first virtual seminar. My name is Sharice Ruan, Marketing Content Manager at Alertus Technologies, and I'm joined by my co-moderator, Rachel Chopin, Marketing Specialist. We're so fortunate to be joined today by emergency experts Chris McLaughlin, Ben Brewer, Caroline Ramsey Hamilton, Suzanne Bernier, and Daniel Dahlman. Today's speakers all have rich backgrounds in emergency preparedness and response and will guide you through the entire roadmap from preparedness to recovery. Each presentation will be followed by Q&A for that particular speaker. Feel free to submit your questions during the presentation at any time, and they will be addressed during the Q&A session at the end of that speaker's presentation. This seminar is being recorded and will be shared with you after today's event. If you have any questions after this presentation, please email marketing@alertus.com. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to begin with a poll. On your screen, you should see the question, does your organization have an emergency management plan? With 3 multiple choice answers. Please take a few moments to answer the question. All right, that looks really good. It seems as if 96% of people do have an emergency management plan in place. This is really great news. Our first speaker, Christopher McLaughlin, can definitely attest to that. Chris is the Senior Director of Emergency Management and Institutional Assurance at North Central Texas College. Chris has been in higher education for over 14 years. He leads all safety-related programs for his district, including the police department, emergency management, risk management, and environmental health and safety. Chris will be presenting addressing common mistakes from the planning stage before it's too late. Now I'd like to turn it over to Chris.
Good morning, everybody. So as Sharice mentioned, I've been at North Central Texas College for over 14 years. Actually started our first emergency management and police department here back in 2014, but I've been involved in emergency management for a long time before that, as well as law enforcement. So kind of have a background in multiple things in there. So just to kind of kick everything off, I mean, everybody has, or the vast majority of everyone has an emergency management plan. So you know about the 4 phases of emergency management: preparedness, response, recovery, mitigation. They've kind of started slipping some prevention into some of that, but I really think that's a combination of preparedness and mitigation, but that's really kind of semantics and what, you know, the kind of the wins as things change in emergency management on the federal level as well. So the basic planning steps, and this is from some FEMA planning guidance. You may have seen this, you may not, but these are the basic 6 steps in developing a plan for an emergency management plan. You see, forming your planning, collaborative planning team, identifying that core team, developing your framework, assigning those roles and responsibilities, regular scheduling meetings, documenting everything along the way. Identifying your threats and hazards, whether that's a THIRA, whether that's an internal risk assessment, whether that's some other metric that you've developed or someone else has developed that you apply internally. It's really good to understand your situation as you develop your plans moving forward. Determining those goals and objectives. What do you really hope to get out of your plan? Do you want that plan on the shelf? It's a checkbox that you have one and it's a compliance piece, or it's something that's going to be useful for you. When you go through step 4, you're in that plan development. So you're going through multiple iterations of the plan. Then you get into that preparation where you're forming everything together, you're formatting, you're making it cohesive, you're making it understandable and readable. You're writing out the plan, reviewing the plan, and then approving and sharing the plan with everyone else. And then that implementation and maintenance, so that's training everyone, that's exercising, and that's the long-term process. You know, it's called a living document. It's review, revise, and maintain. You know, if you have an event that you're updating as you have events to inform your plan to make it better for the next time. So a couple of quotes that are often heard in this area. You know, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. You know, there are multiple iterations of that quote, along with, you know, planning is important. So that Dwight Eisenhower quote, the peacetime plans are of no particular value, but peacetime planning is indispensable. So your plan may not be of any particular value in peacetime when you're not, you know, actively using it, but the planning process is where you learn a lot. So there are multiple iterations of that quote as well. So just a couple of things that kind of tie back into the planning phase. So to get onto some planning mistakes, one of the biggest things when you're forming your planning teams is understanding who's sitting at the table and looking at inside the organization first. So do you have emergency management, risk management, public safety? Depending on the structure of your organization, you may not have all of those things at your organization. But if you include some form of those that you have within your organization, it's very important. Information technology, that's going to be very, very critical. Not just for your emergency management plans, but also some of your continuity things and informing those things down the line that may run in parallel to your emergency operations plan. Those are very important. For us at a college with student residents that live on campus that have meal plans, we have food services. So is food service sitting at your planning table? To understand how you're going to continue to feed students when you're housing them and you have a major disaster. We have some winter weather that could potentially be here this week, and we have plans in place for how we continue to get food service staff, that critical staff in place, and continue services. Counseling, with whether that's your, for us in a community college to have our counseling staff for students available in the event of a crisis. As well as on the human resources side. So this may be private industry, could be the same for us in higher ed for our employee assistance program, including HR in that. So how do we continue to provide that psychological first aid and some of the longer term things that we need to do for our employees for their mental health after a major disaster. And then your facilities and maintenance, are they at the table? So not including any of these, you could have some gaps in there that you may have to scramble in the event of a major disaster or emergency or crisis, that you may not be able to fully address everything that could potentially come up if you haven't at least had a discussion with these individuals at the table. And then looking outside the organization. So it's not, developing your emergency operations plan is not just an internal process. It's best if you include your outside organizations, especially if you don't have any or all of these on your premise. So us as a community college, we have our own police department. We don't have fire, EMS, public health, public works on premise. But even with our own police department, we still have to include our outside law enforcement agencies at our planning phase. So we bring them to the planning table so we can talk through all of these situations, because that's when your emergency operations plans are typically engaged and activated, is when you're overwhelmed. Your standard resources, your standard response is overwhelmed, and you have to start putting together that complex coordinated response for multiple agencies. So is your local fire department, whether that's hazmat, depending on your organization, whether that's your just a local fire station, to have somebody present to they're going to be responding to your building. That are they present, and do they know how everything works? Emergency medical services in the event of a major health crisis, a mass casualty incident. Do you know how they triage? So you're actually getting good information from them, and they know how you're going to manage your internal incident, so you can coordinate that response. Along with police, obviously, for criminal threats and those types of things, especially in the active shooter situations that could potentially arise. Do they know your buildings? Do they know your procedures? Do they know what you're going to be doing? And do you know what they're going to be doing? So it's as seamless as possible. It's still organized chaos in some of these events, but you still have to be aware of what each other are doing. Public health and public works. On the public health side, when we come up on flu season, we come up on these potential novel infectious diseases, high consequence infectious diseases. It's important to have public health, because you may end up being a point of distribution. You set up a pod on your location, and you could be working through vaccinations and those types of things on your premise, as well as dealing with food safety throughout an incident. If you lose power and you continue to have to feed and those types of things on your premise, you're going to want to make sure you have some public health input in that as well. And then public works for all of your utilities. That's getting through the event, and that's getting into recovery and getting through recovery. It's important to have them at the table as well. So are your compliance, are your emergency operations plans for compliance? Are they the plan on the shelf? Have you used a cookie cutter template? I know that's one thing that I know when I have spoken with a number of partner institutions that we worked with, a lot were seeking, they were seeking the cookie cutter template that they could, find, replace, and get it done so they could get their plans done, and then they could massage and work out the kinks later. But a lot of the times that ends up being the compliance plan on the shelf. So you have to have one. You have to check the box. In the state of Texas, for us, we're legislatively mandated to have, as a community college, to have an emergency operations plan, a multi-hazard emergency operations plan. And we have that in place. But I can tell you that prior to 2014, our plan was the cookie cutter plan. It was a state template. It was a find replace of whatever city municipality block that was created by the State Office of Emergency Management, and that was put in place, and it sat on the shelf, and it wasn't really a useful document. So make sure that and it's not wrong to use a template or a plan. It may apply to you, and you can make modifications to those, but just make sure that it's not something that's just there for compliance, and that it is a useful document. Because you don't want to have that in place at your organization and just be there to take your time and effort away only for compliance. You want to make sure that it's something useful for you. Has it been tested and exercised? So this is one of the things that it is a challenge, and it depends on the size of your agency and your department and your organization to really test and exercise these properly. You want to make sure that it is done, and that you have at least a couple of tabletops a year to make sure that you're talking and walking through the processes of the plan. Otherwise, it does become stale, and people are not familiar. You can do training on it, and training is valuable on the plan itself. But really walking through and practicing is where you get the most value out of this. And we are hosted by Alertus today, so testing your alert and communication systems is very, very important, and that's all part of your preparedness, not just in your emergency operations plan, but your overall preparedness. Are you ready, and do you have points of failure that you may not be aware of? We test our Alertus desktop monthly, so we push that out to everybody once a month, and then once per semester we do all the bells and whistles. So we push our text messages, our social media, we activate our indoor beacons and our audible tests and everything else, and we do the whole bells and whistles once per term. So we make sure that we have everything tested, so that if we have a major incident, that we don't have points of failure that that creep up on us that we don't expect. Staff capabilities and responsibilities are a big piece of that testing and exercising. Like I said, you can train on it, but really walking through it, people understand a bit better what their roles and responsibilities are, and they understand where their own capabilities lie. You may have somebody that does a similar job on the day-to-day, but they may not handle stress well. And running through some of these tabletop exercises will give them a sense of where they are as far as their capabilities, as well as yourself. So you know that maybe this person needs a little bit more training or support. Maybe this person is not the right fit for this role specifically in the Emergency Operations Center. So you can make those adjustments on the fly through those tests and exercises to make sure that you're doing those properly. And then the tabletop functional and full-scale exercises. We try to have at minimum one tabletop per year. We try to do more than that. I'm a staff of one in the emergency management office. We have a public safety staff, and we have a number of other individuals over there, but I'm a staff of one in emergency management. We're a 6-campus system, and we're spread out over about a 200-mile radius. So to get to all of our locations and to work in all those areas, it's a challenge. And I know a lot of other offices face the same challenges. You're spread across multiple areas, and you have multiple hats. and you're trying to do that. So it is challenging, but it's very valuable to do those, and it's a mistake to not have at least one exercise per year. The functional exercises are really valuable to just walk through the process. They don't take as much time and effort as the full-scale exercises do, but it is valuable to kind of walk through, not just talk through, but actually walk through the steps. So if you say you're going to deploy somebody as a liaison to a hospital in a mass casualty incident, then in that functional exercise, you don't turn on the lights and sirens, but you have them deployed to the hospital and see how that works and see what it looks like, and are they going to have resistance when they get there? Those types of things are important to know. The full-scale exercises, largely challenging. It costs money. It takes a lot of time to plan, and you want to make sure everything's done well and done right, to have controllers and to have evaluators and everything in place to facilitate all of that. But you learn a lot out of it, and you get a lot of outside. We get a lot of outside partners involved in full-scale exercises, and they've been very valuable for us. Another piece is pre-planning event and incident, emergency incidents. So our commencement is coming up tomorrow, actually, and we do multiple events throughout the year. We pre-plan incident action plans for every emergency, for every potential emergency at different incidents. So every incident has an event action plan, an incident action plan. And we do individual event risk assessments. So we look at, is this going to be broadcast on the internet? Is it going to be televised? Are there going to be controversial speakers? Are we going to have, is there potential for protest? Is there potential for unrest? Have there been threats against this? What's the history of this event? We look at all of those things. Alcohol going to be served across the spectrum. And we look at all of those things, and that allows us to better allocate our resources. And it also allows us to have a better handle of that specific event. Your emergency operations plan can be very strategic, and you want it to be strategic. You want it to be that kind of high level. It applies to a lot of things because it is an all hazard plan, but you may have specific things that you want an event action plan for a specific event. And I have a really good example of that. We had just a couple of years ago, we had a concert event that was going to be hosted on our campus. It was a benefit concert for a country music artist and his foundation, Randy Travis. So we were going to have that event on campus. We found out about it about a week and a half before it was scheduled, so it didn't make it to us to prepare plans for just yet. So once the information got to us, it was going to be a fairly small attendance, maybe 600 or so. It was kind of an invite-only small event, but it was a foundation benefit. So we got that put together. We started our incident action planning for that event, and we found out just a few days before that event was going to happen that there was a potential that George W. Bush was going to be attending, and his Secret Service reached out to us and let us know that. So that changed our plans dramatically. We know that there's potential for any time you have any kind of high-profile VIP that's going to be attending your event, going to be at your building, on your campus, on your premise, that you're going to have additional issues. So we did have to bolster up quite a lot, move in some different resources, change our traffic flow patterns, change all of our parking patterns. We changed it up quite a lot. So we didn't have any vehicles parked next to buildings. We had chicanes set up to protect against any potential vehicle attacks, anything like that. So we made a lot of adjustments on site, because we know that if something does go wrong and something bad happens, typically the Secret Service is going to get their VIP out of there, and then we are left with the rest of whatever issue cropped up. So we had to bolster those up quite a lot. So that's one of those that we already had a pre-event plan in place for that, and then we just got to adjust pretty quickly on the fly. But we didn't have to invent it from scratch, because we made that a common practice of doing an event plan for every single event. So that was already in place. So those strategic emergency plans that I talked about on the last slide, where you want them to be multi-hazard, you want them to be operating from that all hazards framework, they don't necessarily always have to be prescriptive. And I know some plans like to be very prescriptive in how they handle every incident, so it's almost like a checklist. it's not, I'm not saying that this is 100% right for everybody, but what we have done is taken our emergency operations plan and turned it into a framework. So this is our framework of legal authority. This is our framework of areas of responsibility, general guidelines for response, but we don't include in the law enforcement section, if we have an incident, here's how we set up a perimeter. Law enforcement already knows how to set up a perimeter for whatever incident that is, so we don't have to be overly prescriptive in our strategic emergency operations plan. So we keep that a more manageable document, and it's easier to refer back to that document as an authority framework, so we can go look and see what legal authorities in here. We have a promulgation statement from our leadership that allows the emergency operations team to make some critical decisions on the fly, so it doesn't go into kind of a longer term debate on some things when we have exigent circumstances and we have a need for life safety and those things. So leadership has already recognized some of those things and given some of those authorities. So we have that in there. And we're developing checklists and playbooks. So per each of our campuses, we're in the process of currently actually developing a playbook. So we already have a checklist for our emergency operations activations and how all of that works, so that anybody working in the EOC can go down a checklist for setting up their role, getting into position, knowing what steps they need to touch before we start getting into the incident. But now we're looking to start developing playbooks. So we have maps of our campus. We have where all of our cutoffs are for utilities and all of those things kind of all pre-prepared, and then how we would start doing either an A side or a B side response. So if we can't access one side of campus, here's how we would respond on the other side, and here's where staging would generally be. So we can kind of pre-plan some of those things and be a little bit more prescriptive in the playbook without having to put that in our overall emergency operations plan that's supposed to be, for us at least, strategic and apply to all of our campuses. So the playbook level for us gets down to the individual site locations. And that's about all I have for this. Those are just some of the things that we've come across in some of our planning. And now I'm open for some questions.
All right. Thank you, Chris. We are now beginning the Q&A session of Chris's presentation. If you have a question, please submit them through the chat or question box. Now let's begin with our first question. If my organization doesn't have any emergency or risk management personnel, who should take on this role when planning for emergency management?
So I can tell you that if you have somebody that has any kind of expertise or interest in that, it's valuable to have them do some training. And if leadership is okay with assigning that task to someone, I can tell you that prior to developing our emergency operations staff in-house, and before creating our emergency operations or emergency management team and public safety office in the institution, that just happened in 2014 for us, and I moved directly over there. Prior to that, I was a volunteer in emergency management. I had education in emergency management. I was a law enforcement officer, but those were all kind of part-time volunteer jobs that I did. My full-time job was in IT. So I was the IT guy. I was a senior systems analyst, but I was starting to develop our emergency operations plans for the institution. So I had some expertise in there. They were okay with allowing me to do that as part of some committee work or some extra assignment. So I would say if you have somebody that has expertise in that, it's valuable to have them do that and then have leadership buy-in for that.
Okay, thank you. How often should we review our emergency management plan?
We review at least annually. So we have an annual review. Anytime we have an incident, we also do a mini review of whatever areas of the emergency operations plan or emergency management plan were challenged. So if we had an armed intruder on a campus at one point, they were nearby the campus. It could have turned into a potential active shooter threat. It was an armed person nearby the campus. So anything in our emergency operations plan that challenged, so our communications, our warning annexes, anything in there, we reviewed immediately after that, and we did a full review. We do an improvement plan after every one of those, and then we have a full every 3 years we do a full review revision but we do at least an annual review and then each incident.
Thank you. Do you have a special operation risk assessment template that you'd be willing to share?
Sure, I can share. We have a template. I'll have to scrub a little bit on it because I think we've probably modified quite a lot, but we have it's a very brief risk assessment for our individual events. But I have that template along with our emergency or our event action plan template. I'd be happy to share that.
All right. Thank you. How or do you engage students in emergency management planning?
So it can be a challenge sometimes, but we do a lot of programming with students. So we have, to begin with, we have a first year experience course, and we kind of go through all of our safety planning with students there. So we kind of get a gauge of interest in what students kind of want to participate in some of those, and it's done both online and face to face. So we train some faculty and staff that develop those and deliver those courses. So we work with them and training them. They get kind of feedback on what students may be engaged and interested in the process, and then they forward them on to us if they're interested. They have questions. A lot of instructors assign assignments to students talking about campus safety. So we do a lot of engagement with students in that level as well. And then we have a student that sits on our emergency. We have a safety committee, a safety and audit committee. So every 3 years we do a full safety audit of the entire institution, and it's full comprehensive. And we have students that sit on that. We also pull interns into the department occasionally, and they are out of either our criminal justice program, and we're in the process of looking to start up an emergency management academic for credit associate's degree program at our institution. So we try to engage students at all of those, and we also present at a lot of events. So we show up at welcome back parties at the beginning of every term, and we try to engage with our students at our tables and kind of give away some of our information, talk with students, find out what level of interest they have in things, and get feedback from them as well.